I am going to build on the things that both Alison and Hamish, and actually to a lesser extent Dirk, have talked about, and I am going to challenge it a little bit because the yield is king argument, yes it is, but there are some things that are limiting us that we as researchers may not be able to overcome on our own. So today we're going to be talking about, can a lighter touch pay its way? I'll talk about how some of our challenges can actually present an opportunity. I've had the opportunity to again look back over long-term data sets and see where we've come from, and then how we can actually embed a lighter touch paying its way. And I'd like to acknowledge a lighter touch. I believe there's at least one person from a lighter touch has joined us here today, and there will be a Slido question at the end. So I would also like to put a disclaimer in. Any resemblance to any person's living or dead is strictly coincidental. I have used ChatGPT to generate a lot of these images, so just fair warning. So our challenge, we've already talked about yields and gross margins, and we've already talked about commodity crop use and being a domestic market. Now, that is a constraint, but also it gives us a little bit of freedom. So if I think about the other lighter touch partners, some of their programs are very prescriptive. So we do have a little bit of freedom to be able to manage the crop as we see fit. But then that comes with license to operate, and we've got consumers and end user markets that are increasingly more aware of what we're doing, and license to operate and environmental constraints that we need to be considerate of as we move forward. The thing that we haven't talked about yet, and I'll talk about this a little bit today, is agrochemical resistance. So we can do everything perfectly, but our tools may not be there to support us. And there are limited softer pathways. So because we are, a domestic market commodity crop in our cereal space, it's very difficult for lighter touch, softer options like biopesticides to be profitable in the way that we would like them to be profitable. So it's a really challenging scenario. And if we think a little bit more about those markets and margins, our wheat prices have been relatively static, and they are sort of trending downwards. And I'm going to again acknowledge the work that Anton Nichols has done with that cost of production work. The costs of production have gone up. Are we getting any more yield for it? Because these are really quite intensive programs. We've talked about, we've spent big to get big. Are we getting any more for our big spend? This is an opportunity for a lighter touch programs. So can we spend a little bit less and maintain that level of profitability and maintain our yields? And I really liked what you said, Hamish, about, a cereal crop. It is not our high value vegetable seed crop, but for a number of us, it is the foundation of what we build our rotation on. So getting this stuff right enables us to get everything else right as well. We talk about managing risk. I'm going to put yield as king up here because it has been talked about today, and it is. We have to get high yields. Now, the 12.5 tonne that Anton's talked about is actually not dissimilar to our 12.5 tonnes that we get across our irrigated feed wheat trials across Canterbury. Increasingly, I'm hearing growers, and particularly after the last season, saying that wasn't enough to make them the money, and increasingly people are budgeting on 14 tonnes. So yield is king, and when we're in an environment where prices are down and cost of production is up, financial risk is going to outweigh any other risk. So we are financially risk averse ahead of being environmentally risk averse. So we're going to do all we can within our limits to make sure that we remain as profitable as we can, and that can have some unintended consequences. This is the challenge I put to having high productivity. So having high productivity and increasing yields relies on genetics management and the environment. So we're working in a place where all of those stepwise gains that we've been able to achieve over the last sort of 10, 20 years, the genetics has probably reached the cap of where the genetics is going to get to within our current cultivars that are suited to our environments. The next part is management. We have probably done everything that we can to get us there. So there is not a silver bullet that's going to give us the next stepwise yield increase. And that means the environment is the one that's going to be doing the lifting here. And that is the one thing we can't control. And we all know from our years of collective experience that the environment can be the thing that gives you a 20% yield increase due to solar radiation during grain fill period, or if it's wet and rubbish. So that is our challenge. And at the end of the day, when many of us might be carrying intergenerational debt or large amounts of debt, and we see cost of production data and we have to get 12.5 tonnes, the final decision, whatever your opinion on a lighter touch or softer options might be, it may well be that the bank is the one who makes the final call on what you do on farm. So, in an environment like this, and I am taking on the mantle of saying the things that the room might not like to hear from Alison, our appetite for having to F around and find out is pretty low. So, what are we doing about it? So the lighter touch program, and bearing in mind this is a systems approach, our model crop is wheat, and this is kind of a hospital pass because it's a commodity crop, domestic use, and if we can make it work in a cereal crop, we can make it work for anything. So we're building our program on effective use of plant genetics as much as we can, incorporating new crop protection technologies and understanding the opportunity for biologicals, which Alison is going to talk about during this conference, and rationalising chemical pesticide programs. So this is actually some generic concepts that you can apply to any crop in your system, because what we're trying to build here is a system to adopt that builds resilience into your rotation. And today's talk is going to focus primarily on rationalising chemical pesticide programs, and within that work we're looking at the right product, the right timing, the right number of applications, the right mixtures and combinations, and the right product rates. And today we're going to focus primarily on the right number. And Dirk talked about finding safe zones, and I promise we did do our work independently. It wasn't a group assignment, but the concepts are very similar, and that we have safe zones. So when we look at the number of applications, and this is some lighter touch work that we've done over the last 5 years, this is irrigated work in mid-Canterbury, and we're looking at the number of applications. So starting with a base program that's got 2 applications, 3 applications, and 4 applications. When we look at yield, which is our graph here, we've got yield up the y-axis, and on the right-hand graph, we've got margin over fungicide cost. And the interesting thing here is we've got different pricing structures. So up here was when the grain prices were really high, we had that uncertainty and instability with Ukraine, and prices shot up. And down here is where things have kind of returned back to a more normal kind of pricing structure. In both yield and our profitability, we have a zone. So the further to the right we are, the flatter the curve. And that tells us that we've actually got some wiggle room to actually look at some of these applications and decide whether or not they are making us money, because the sweet spot really probably sits somewhere back here. And the less we're getting, the flatter that curve, and the closer to the left we can safely occupy. And just like Dirk, it's not a cliff. I lose count in the number of times that I get phone calls or conversations in paddocks with growers going, if I don't put my T-Nor on, I'm going to plummet off a cliff. It's not a cliff, it's a plateau. And to help us understand that a little bit more, we've gone back to 2013. So this is before my time at FAR. And since 2013, we have done 47 trials where we're comparing 3-spray and 4-spray programs. And within that, there have been 111 different 3-spray and 4-spray comparisons across all of our environments where we grow wheat. And of those 111 comparisons, 14 times was that significant. So around 13% of the time, the addition of a T0 gave you a significant yield increase. To put that into perspective, our sort of average across all of those trials and all of those regions, our 3-spray yield was about 11.5 tonnes. Our 4-spray yield was about 11.7. So we've got a difference of around about 160 kilos. When we ran the stats on that, For it to be a significant yield increase, it needed to be getting you at least 430 kilos, so just under half a tonne. There were 2 years where we came close. The very first year, where there was only one trial. And for those of us who were around in 2016, it was a particularly wet and challenging year. That came close. And a lot of that yield gain with that T0 was driven by use of a susceptible cultivar. And for those of us who remember Oakley, it was dirty as anything, but responded super, super well to fungicide. And that's really important because we can pretty much draw a line at about 2018. And prior to 2018, we were looking to get runs on the board really quickly. So we were looking at high yielding cultivars that were dirty as anything and responded really well to fungicide. And that was a big win because we were getting closer and closer to that yield potential. We identified that that was a really risky strategy and we needed to be more resilient. So post 2018, we have played the long game. So we're using more resilient cultivars where their yield response to fungicide isn't as great, but our yields are far more stable. And since then, despite there being a number of seasons that have been a bit dicey, 2018 was one, and there was one another couple of years ago, we haven't seen anywhere near the response to that T0. When we think about the money, again, going back over all of those comparisons, actually, our return on fungicide spend for a 3-spray and a 4-spray program has been the same. 47 trials, 111 comparisons, it's the same. But we are spending more. So in that earlier slide, I think the fungicide spend that Anton presented was around $500 to $600 for a 4-spray program. That's really similar to the prices that we're finding in our own programs. If I had said in 2013 that you would be spending $500 to $600 on a fungicide program, you would have laughed me out of the room. I remember having conversations with Paulie and Rob that $300 was probably too much back in the day. The other thing we need to think about is there have been sort of fluctuating prices in that time. When global grain prices are really high, any spend on fungicide makes you money. And it's really tempting to go full foot to the floor. But in these seasons, this was when the grain price dropped under $400 a tonne, and it may yet do that again. So we need to just be really careful that we're not overspending because that has some consequences. And the consequences, is this still working? Are our programs, are our tools still working in the way that they should be? And while it's really nice for me to kind of like use averages and gloss everything out, I know that there are a number of, there's a quarter to a third of the room are farmers, and I know that there are people from all over New Zealand here. So what does that mean for where I farm? So over those 47 different trials, we actually have actually looked at it by location. We actually only did one trial up, there's only one trial up in Manawatu, but again, you weren't getting any extra money and you weren't getting any extra yield from a T0 application. Mid-Canterbury, where most of us in the room are probably from, we have 60 different comparisons for an irrigated scenario and about 9 for our dryland scenario. Our yield difference is just under 200 kilos. Our return on that investment is largely insignificant. And the number of times, or the risk that we have here is around 17% of the time we got a yield response to that T0 in a mid-Canterbury irrigated, and around 11% of the time for a mid-Canterbury dryland. For our South Canterbury growers and reps here, the difference is about 60 kilos. Again, it's not going to make us any money, and not once out of 20 different comparisons over that time has there been a yield response to a T0. And for those of us from the deep south, there are 21 different comparisons. 50 kilos is what it might make you. Largely insignificant, and you're getting a significant yield response 9% of the time. So when we're thinking about risk, even under the very highest pressure conditions, the likelihood of having a significant yield or financial return from a T0 fungicide is less than 1 in 5. So there is a less than 1 in 5 chance that it's actually going to do what you hope it will do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that applying a T0 is wrong, but it can actually, you can ask yourself, why should I change? Because I'm in the paddock anyway. T0, I'm putting a PGR on. I'm potentially putting an insecticide on. I'm hopefully monitoring my aphid and beneficial populations, but I might be doing a number of things at that time. So it doesn't take me any more time and it's just some extra chemical in the tank. Well, we all know that, sometimes things can get a bit of a tickle up. So one less thing in your tank mix is not necessarily a bad move. It's cheap insurance and I can't afford not to. Every year I get that. I get it on the phone, I get it in person. I can't afford not to do it. I have to get 12.5 tonnes. I actually have to get 14. I will do everything that I can to get that yield. We are financially risk averse before we are risk averse to anything else. The long-term data sets going back to 2013 show pretty conclusively that yes, there is a risk, but it's low. And it's not a cliff, it's a plateau. So we do have some safe zones of operation even with high risk. And there are resources that can help you decide. And I'd like to touch with this, but I'd also like to credit our fungicide resistance industry partners, ADAMA, BASF, Bayer, Corteva, and Syngenta. We've had all of those people in the room, and we've come to some agreed kind of guidelines, and this was one of them. If you're not sure, ask yourself, does my crop have striped rust or powdery mildew? If it has those, then yes, by all means, get the chemical out, get in the sprayer. If it doesn't, work your way through that flow chart to see whether or not you're going to get a benefit from that. And the unintended consequences of our risk is that we have put on a number of applications and that has driven resistance. So we're reducing the sensitivity of the very tools that we need to manage the diseases that we need to. And I'd like to thank Plant and Food Research, Elita Touch, and the partners I mentioned earlier. Plant and Food is in the room. And I've got only a few minutes, but that's good, I'm nearly done. So our top is prothioconazole, so that's our pro line, and we can see over time that these things are getting progressively less sensitive. The same thing is happening in our SDHI group. Our triazoles are really important because they come in at every application. And hidden in plain sight on all of those product labels is the wording, apply no more than 3 per season inclusive of a seed treatment. If you are putting in if you have a 3-spray triazole program plus a seed treatment, you are already over that. If you have a T0, you are including 5 applications. So it's not hard to see that we start seeing things and isolates and changing populations that have some pretty high resistance factors. And this means we need more of the chemistry to do the job that it did previously. So the unintended consequence of our risk is that we might well be breaking the very tools that we need to remain profitable. And we need to solve that, and if only it was this simple. So, finishing up, we are fine-tuning here. We have exhausted genetics that we have exhausted the management that we have. We are fine-tuning for resilience and stability. And I'm really excited to hear what the technology space is going to talk about as we go through this conference, because that is probably where the changes are going to come from next. Since 2013, our 3 and 4 spray programs have generated the same amount of yield, they've had the same return on investment. Our risk aversion has resulted in unintended consequences, and it means that some of our tools may not work quite so well for us. So when you are in the hot seat, it may be appropriate to consider where you invest that spend, and it may be that there is somewhere else within your rotation or within your crop that might give you a better return on investment, that might mean things are a little bit more resilient. We want to be this person, profits ahead of all else. So I have challenged a little bit what Hamish has said. I agree with it, but at the moment we're fine-tuning and working within limits. And if we can maintain what we've got and reduce our costs, that's a start. Are there any questions for me? And I do have a Slido. And I would like to say, you can put whatever you like as long as it's not rude or mean. And beers is not the answer. I will say that there are people from A Lighter Touch here present, and this is going to help them with what resources they might need. So it might be, I want to see you in a paddock more, or I want more podcasts, or so please. Can we fix the flicking projector, please? But are there any questions for me?
There's one up there.
Not so much a question, just a challenge.
Yeah, go on.
Back on the management side of things.
Yes, please.
I think soil health should jump into management, and I think the overuse of fungicides is killing that. There's a challenge.
Oh, it's part of the A Lighter Touch program, Nigel.
Yeah. And there's one up the back there.
Ron?
I've been struggling a fair bit with solar radiation at the top end of the plains the last few years, and some hail as well. What's your comment on, I'm already at 3 sprays, what are your thoughts about 2 spray on a new genetic clean variety?
Actually, I will say that some of our data, and one of my slides that I put up, actually, a 2-spray program was actually fine in a number of instances. So when we look at sort of shoulder applications, the easiest ones to drop off are T0 and T4, and then we can actually start to rationalise out the value of that T3. So for some of us, that T3 may, depending on our season, actually be something else that we could consider dropping off. Remember that plateau at the top, it is towards the left-hand side of it. It can be a little bit risky. Where it works a little bit better is in some of the dryland environments, but it's a case by case. And where you are and where you farm, a T3 is usually going to pay its way and is usually needed. But as long as we set up our T1 and our T2 really robustly, they'll do a really good job of carrying us through, and that T3 is really only going to mop us up at the end. And I'm standing between you and morning tea, so perhaps if anyone's got any other questions, they might like to come and talk to me during the break time. But thank you all so much for your attention.
Okay.